All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Mindgasms podcast. We're going to get to talk to Sean McCoy today, who I recently got to do his Come to the Table podcast. And we talked about the drug war and sort of different perspectives on it, like which is outlined in The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, about how Black people are disproportionately affected by the drug war, and then also another book called Silent Black Majority, about how alternative strategies have been attempted before, and kind of adding more nuance to it. And I wanted to talk to Sean just because I really enjoyed our conversation before. And I think you're a great guy, and you have a lot of fascinating perspectives. And I know that your Come to the Table podcast, it seems to come from your Christian perspective, and I appreciate your worldview on that subject of religion. I know we talked about it a little bit before, so it'd be fun to get into that subject, religion. Maybe just a little bit of our different histories and perspectives on it, and also mixed mental arts, of course, which is basically how we ended up meeting each other, and which is, of course, the famous podcast with Brian Callen, the comedian, and Hunter Motz, his co-host and tutor. And so I guess to start off with, maybe just do you want to just say a little bit about yourself there, Sean?
Sure. Well, first of all, Andrew, obviously, thank you for having me come to your table. You were gracious enough to come to mine, and so I really appreciate the invite. And the feelings mutual as far as all that good stuff. I think it's a big, beautiful world out there full of all kinds of people, and that diversity can be a rather amazing characteristic that we have, as long as I think if we come together around this idea that mutual respect and understanding, and really being more inclined as to understand somebody else's point of view rather than to try to prove it wrong, I think just leads to such growth and such a transformation for all of us. That chance, you mentioned, it seems like all of us that are fans of the Mixed Mental Arts podcast and have delved into the podcasting world, we cannot get very far from the center, right? We can't get very far without bringing up Hunter Motz and Brian Callen. I think that's a big testament to not only them, but I think that the subject matters that they talked about, the way that they talked about it, and I think the way that it resonated with so many different kinds of people from different angles and different variations of life as far as that goes. So, but to your original question, a little bit about me, it's such a funny, as I've gotten older now, I just turned 46, and at least in my world, you're trying to describe who you are anymore. I could go with the typicals, where I'm born and raised, and have lived in Texas. I've lived in Houston, Texas since I was born, except for my time in the Navy. I spent 6 years in the service, but other than that, I've lived down here. And for the most, I've been in oil and gas for 17 years. I've tried starting my company as far as professionally. I can give you education and stuff like that, but the things that are most important to me are my faith and my family and my friends and the people that I know. I really feel like that defines me more than anything. And, I married, kids, just a multitude of people that I consider people that I could truly call and call friend. And whether it's great times or tough times, something like that, those are those areas. But I've just been a student. I feel like I've been a student or consistent student of life, and tried to be for as long as I can remember, because it's a beautiful dance, man. I love being a part of it.
Awesome. Well said. I like all of that. And I also try to practice being a student of life, as you said. I like that. Yeah, I'm not sure which one to discuss first. I guess how did you find out about mixed mental arts in the first place?
I was trying to remember. I was actually working for a company and I had about an hour commute each way, hour plus, and I for years had gotten tired of talk radio, sports radio. It has become so monotonous, and then listening to radio's stations and even playlists, I kind of got monotonous. I got into podcasts, and I don't exactly remember where I stumbled upon that, but when I did, it was the Brian Callen show. So that I think Bloodcott Williams was it was like number 7 or 8, I think, of their series is when I first came across it. And and I just remember that particular episode. I remember Brian was a comedian, pretty funny guy. And then this really amazing story of this guy. I don't know if you remember that one, but he was a guy he was a heavy metal grunge. I think that was kind of his forte, but he had grown up he'd grown up in the projects in New York City. I had been in like gangs and been in violent, just grown up in a tough life and all these other things. And it was just an interesting perspective that the I guess the counterbalance between somebody like Brian and Hunter wasn't quite on the show yet. He wasn't a co-host quite yet at that time. And then I came across them and I just remember, I just loved the nuances that Brian allowed this guy time, who wasn't maybe your typical high end, if you look at some of the authors and some of the higher, Jared Diamonds of the world that you could get really, really fancy with and, hold your pinky way up high with in terms of that kind of stuff. He was such a different guy, but they gave him equal billing. I remember just thinking, wow, and he had a great story. He had some things to say and there was some wisdom in there. And then I think, at first it was kind of more entertaining and kind of listening to that kind of stuff. And there's a couple of things that he had that I wasn't too thrilled about, but when him and Hunter really got into the groove of things and really started going down the books and really helping the listener, helping you and I digest the world and what's going on and how culture works and how our feelings work and getting these multitude of perspectives and really enriching just that ability to kind of look at different aspects of information and really take that in and understand it and then understand yourself relative to that. That was really a huge, I felt that podcast has just been extremely valuable in terms of my own progression, for lack of a better word. Not that I'm a big fan of that word, but just, all that kind of stuff.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I totally forgot that Hunter was not the co-host from the very beginning. I'd totally forgotten about that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I actually started listening to that podcast way back when it was called the Brian Callen Show too, before it eventually changed its name to Mixed Mental Arts, and then eventually back to the Brian Callen Show. And now it's the Brian Callen Show, but the episodes when they're posted are also on the Mixed Mental Arts channel. So it's kind of like both. I think the first way that I found out about Mixed Mental Arts was from Joe Rogan's podcast, because Brian Callen has been on that show many times. And I thought, wow, I got into Joe Rogan at first because I thought, this is a comedian who, well, in how I first got into Joe Rogan was that I was watching his very first comedy special that was on Netflix. I think it was like 2006. And I just remembered at the start of that comedy special, the intro before he started the actual comedy was him in the back of a car, sort of waxing philosophically about what humans would look like if aliens viewed us from an external perspective. And he thought that they would view us as some kind of virus. And I thought that's a really interesting perspective for a comedian, especially. And then I started watching his podcast and think, wow, this guy's really smart for a comedian. That's pretty interesting. And then Brian Callen was on the show and I thought, wow, this guy's really well read and interesting and smart too. So I should check out his podcast too. And then I got really into that. And then I think I eventually got more involved with Mixed Mental Arts because I had learned from Jonathan Haidt, based on Mixed Mental Arts recommendation of his work. I read The Righteous Mind, and I also listened to their episodes with Jonathan Haidt, and I listened to Jonathan Haidt's debate with Sam Harris about militant atheism. And so eventually all of those factors kind of shattered my militant atheism, I would say. I'm still an atheist, but sort of like an agnostic atheist, and I'm not militant at all. And I like for example, my friend Tim, we've done series on theology, for example, and we're doing another one now. So I really like learning about that. And so I sent Hunter a tweet, something about Jonathan Haidt, and I was surprised that he actually replied to me. And then we had a bit of an exchange, and then he invited me to the Mixed Mental Arts Facebook group, and then participating in a few of the Mixed Mental Arts chats a while ago. Like the first one I participated in was the religion one. That led me to deciding to start my own YouTube channel, and then I eventually just started talking with a whole bunch of people in mixed mental arts, and then eventually through Hayden Bruce, who is our mutual friend, I heard you on his podcast, and then that eventually got, I think actually, yeah, how we actually ended up talking, though I hadn't talked to you yet, was you saw me comment on a YouTube video of Glenn Lowry talking about that book, The New Jim Crow, and how there's this book, Black Silent Majority, that sort of opposes that view. And you saw my post about it and wanted to talk to me about that. So then all of these factors coincided to us talking together, and the main connection was mixed mental arts. And like you said, it always seems to come back to that.
It does, and it's the funny thing is what you're saying about Hunter is that we have this perception, especially with you start out with like the Joe Rogan, the Brian Callen, people that are out there in the world that we see as somewhat famous and kind of out of reach for the everyday. And I think that's one of the amazing things about podcasts is that you're finding out that even those people are allowed to be more of themselves than they are in the mainstream, right? Because Brian, if you look at his work, if you didn't know anything else about him, you might think he's just a dumb coach because that's what he plays on television really well.
Yeah.
And so, but then you come to find out that he's lived all over the world. He understands not only that, but he's been well versed in that particular genre of just the multicultural aspects of things and understanding it. My favorite, I don't know about you, but my favorite guest on that show was always his dad. I mean, Big Mike was always my favorite guest because
he's great.
Because he brought a real kind of, just a rather unique perspective, and you always felt like it was authentic. And regardless of whether you agreed with it or even if you liked it, I never got the feeling his dad was being standoffish, but there was such a wealth of information there to listen to glean from. And then kind of like you, I even remember sending an email out to Hunter and then getting it back, and then he came on my podcast as well, and it's really great to then connect personally with those people. Looks like it's great to connect with you or Adam Hansen, who I know you've had on before.
Oh yeah, I have a bunch of times.
Yeah, and so it's just a chance to like Adam and I had dinner. I was on a business trip last year up in New Jersey and got the chance to actually have dinner with him. And then so it's just a great connection, not only from an intellectual cognitive standpoint, but also being able to just from a friendship standpoint, right? Like if I'm ever up in your neck of the woods, I would consider it part of, I'd want to call you up and go grab a beer or a cup of coffee or something, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Routine or something like that, we can do it the old Canadian way and then kind of do a little, just kind of, and then just enjoy the time. Because I think I think that what happens is it's that there is a bit of that, I don't want to say seeking or that we're all seeking the same thing, but just when you're trying to find those things out, I think people kind of end up gravitating towards a certain area in that certain path and recognize those certain things. Like you said, when you have somebody who's even like a Joe Rogan, who's supposed to be a big meathead or quote unquote dumb comedian, who's just up there just making people laugh, doing shticks, you come to find out that there's a lot going on up there and there's something worth listening to as far as their concerned. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, like one thing that I like a lot about both Joe Rogan and Brian Callen, like in terms of the podcast and mixed mental arts, of course, as well, is that they're like particularly like Brian Callen and Joe Rogan themselves I see them as like bridges between jocks and nerds. So it's like they bring those two audiences together. It's like people who are into fighting can be like, whoa, who's this intellectual who's saying all this interesting stuff? I should look into that more. And then you could attract nerds too, who see them inevitably talking about fighting, and maybe they'll think, wow, they're saying that jiu-jitsu can be like chess. It can be like an intellectual exercise. What if I got into that too? That'd be really interesting. And I really appreciate that too, because I don't like to usually put labels on myself, but the main ones that I often do put on myself are nerd slash jock slash hippie, because I'm really into reading and learning and really nerdy topics. And I also have like a hippie mindset, and everyone who's seen my channel knows that I enjoy marijuana. And I'm also like a fanatic about working out and taking care of not just my mental capacity, but my physical body too. So
Yeah.
I like all of like the integration of all of these different interests into one thing.
Amen to that, because I think it's in the especially part about being the labels. Like earlier, we were talking when you asked me like to introduce myself. I always get a little, especially now in my life, I've just become very, I don't say sensitive, but I always worry that those labels are going to mean something that they're not intended. Whether it's something as big, I don't even like saying I'm a Christian anymore. Even on even like internally, like I think that there's so much more to it than that. And the amount of baggage that comes with something like that type of label, or being from Texas, or that I like to hunt, or that I'm a father, or that I'm a white, or that I'm a guy. There's just so much of and it comes with this baggage one way or the other. And at the end of the day, that's why I always kind of gravitate towards, I mean, it's nice to, what your Enneagram number is, what your zodiac symbol is, what your, what's the I always forget the name of it, but it's not the ink blot test, not the Rorschach test, but it's the personality test, has the 4 letters. And I know there's somebody probably there screaming going,
oh yeah, I forget what that's called right now too.
I've taken the DISC test. I've taken all those tests, especially in sales and the oil field and corporate America. And, whether you're introverted or extroverted, or introverted extrovert, or the rest of the stuff, I just think all those are kind of a beginning. They're kind of an indication. They should be an indication. Like just the fact that you say you like to smoke marijuana. Well, I think so many times that becomes the stopping point when it should be the starting point, right? Or like where you're from. That shouldn't be the end of the story. That should open up a Pandora's, or not a Pandora's, but a plethora of different things that you can ask about that. About, okay, where are you from? What's that like? Instead of it just being, oh, you're from there. Because it just, I mean,
yeah,
it goes back to mixed martial arts. It goes back to all the stuff you hear about from them. It goes back to stuff that you and I have experienced personally. Like as soon as you start putting that label on there, and as soon as it starts to mean something to you, I think it's gonna go wrong.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Like one of the things that people talk about a lot in mixed martial arts is getting trapped in these labels and defining ourselves and defining other people based on that. Like, and everyone, but it's important to remember that everyone who is in that sort of label, even if they're just like mindlessly following what other people say, probably have at least somewhat of a different perspective, because they're like, everyone has different circumstances that led to the person who they are now, like our upbringing, whatever culture we're part of, whatever part of history we're participating in, all of these other factors. And yeah, like you get into these stereotypes that often, when you look at them more closely, don't seem to apply to most people, or at least most people who I admire. For example, like you were talking about, like the label of stoner, for example. Like you could apply that to Joe Rogan, and then like he talks about this a lot too. There's a stereotype that stoners are lazy, but doesn't make him lazy. Doesn't make me lazy either. I don't smoke weed and then just be like, fuck all my plans for today, I'm just gonna sit on the couch and watch TV. I just want to like get baked to enhance the things I was already planning to do today in my life, like get high and have a great conversation with you, or get high and enjoy exercise more, or something like that. And then like also there's like the stereotype of nerd, and there are some connotations with that, like nerds aren't interested in physical exercise, for example, which to me doesn't make sense. Like they're sort of like opposite sides of the same coin to me. Like I was saying earlier, you should take care of your mind, but like also your body, and they can have synergistic effects on each other. Like exercise, I think it's good for your mind too, for your mental discipline. Well, lots of people talk about that. And like in terms of the label Christian you were talking about, there's so many connotations that come along with that in people's heads. And like I said before, I've really appreciated, especially with my friend Tim, who we do all these philosophy deep dives into just learning more about theology and about the wide variety of different perspectives that people who call themselves Christians can have. Like there's you, who I would say has more of a similar perspective to Hayden, I would say. And then there's my friend Shane Kennedy, who's been on here many times too, who's an Orthodox Christian, and he has like I would say like more traditional views in some ways, but his orthodoxy also leads to like totally opposite of what the stereotype would be of some traditional perspectives. And yeah, I know you obviously understand that very well.
Yeah. Well, and that's been a big area. So what's interesting about what you said, the irony of what you said about the tradition, how it compares to the tradition, is that the irony is that the orthodoxy is actually the original tradition. If you go back historically, that really the Western, what we consider, I should say we, because I don't know who nobody got together and talked about it, but what is typically considered Western Christianity, Western culture Christianity, is much more Protestant, much more, and then much more, and what we look at, especially in the United States, with evangelical Christianity. And I can remember probably 2.5 years ago, I was on one of the first podcasts I was ever on, and a guy who I knew where he was coming from because we had this really great conversation, and he was not religious at all. And finally, he was kind of like, he just was like trying to balance my attitude from a faith standpoint with evangelical Christianity, and he didn't understand. So he finally asked, he's like, "So what's up with the, and I had to admit that even on a personal level, that I was like, I don't remember signing up as one. Like, I don't consider myself an evangelical. I don't even know what that is. I really did not know, and it was at the beginning for me to really kind of go and like pursue that. People may be kind of like scoffing, but there's not a textbook you get. Sometimes you don't really understand, or you hear there's different, like you said, there's so many different versions of the versions that it just depends on where you are. You could be in the same denomination, and depending on where you are in the street, you could be really conservative or really liberal, depending on which you're comparing yourself to. But it put me down a road of really trying to look at, because I came into my faith much later. So I got baptized on my 32nd birthday, and I'm 46. And so before that, I was, maybe a deist, very much an agnostic. I don't think I ever got to the point where I was atheist. But I definitely grew up thinking that all organized religions, and especially Christianity, was a joke. That's how I grew up and I grew up in that household. There was never a kind word was said in my house about any religion, especially Christianity. And it was just not something that was looked at positively. And I thought growing up that I had an independent mindset, that knowledge and wisdom and science and all this stuff was in basic gaining knowledge was probably the thing that was emphasized, even though education per se wasn't highly emphasized. It was just more of just being an intellectual thinker and thinking and contemplating and using that to decipher, and that you could figure things out, right? And then so I grew up for a long time, and then had this very much of a mindset of just that the idea was to progress through the gaining of knowledge. The more that you knew, and so I was very popular around the time of Trivial Pursuit games and trivia contests and stuff like that. And so so that was kind of my baby, and then it became. That's why for me, a lot of times talking to people that are, especially on my show, or just in general, if you're an atheist, or even if it was Christopher Hitchens, like I don't care if you're Richard Dawkins or I guess you can't talk to Christopher or whoever, you're talking to a militant atheist, even if they're like, and I've had militant atheists on my show. And
oh, I didn't know that. I should check out those episodes.
Yeah, Aidan Coughlin was the guy that came on. Vegan, militant atheist. And he used to have a podcast, and he'd have like Richard Carrier was on there.
Cool.
Talking about the historicity of Jesus, and basically
that's the guy who thinks that Jesus never existed.
Right. So his whole, and he came on the show and talked about it for an hour. I read his book, or one of his books, and that basically, just from a historical standpoint, like doing an honest, if you're going to compare it to any kind of historical, typical accepted historical, proving, if you will, of the physical existence of Jesus was. Yeah, he basically lays out a case that it was pretty much like a 8 to 10% chance it was true, that he even existed, let alone the other stuff. And so it's become so. And in listening, so I don't have any on a personal level, regardless of how it contradicts what I quote unquote believe. I have no issue with listening to Richard Carrier or Richard Dawkins or Richard Carrier or whoever, Stephen Fry or Sam Harris, pick, or whoever, even if it's somebody who doesn't, even if somebody's not sure, somebody's just kind of agnostic, or somebody's a deist, or just kind of whatever. Those people don't bother me near as much as the people who I would say claim the same, who kind of put their finger down and say, I believe in this. And then there's such a derivative of that, which is, again, my own issue, my own ego, as far as that goes, I think, at the end of the day. But I don't have any trouble speaking to people because I understand why you would look. I understand why a person would read the Bible. I understand why a person would go to church. I understand why a person would have would take the course of church history, if you will, or even the whole story. And I understand why you'd look at it and go, nah, we're just gonna go, yeah, no, I'm not buying it. I understand that completely, and I don't think so. It doesn't bother me when people feel that way, or if even people feel that if you feel that way. There's a lot of, that people start to question, the typical, right? This, especially in the world, and I'm not to stereotype, but you correct me if you think I'm wrong, but there's typically a bit of, as I remember it, and as I've seen it, typically those that feel like people that become religious do so because either they don't have enough education, or they're not aware enough, or there's a need that they're trying to feel like they have to feel a part of something. And so there becomes this kind of like, oh, well, they're just not quite there yet. And if they knew this, or if there was an element of this, or if they could really understand this much, they would automatically kind of deduce that this over here is probably not true. And it becomes very reasonable. There's a reasonable thing about it. And even Aiden in his episode, he would always say, and even in his own, he said, I would take whatever argument, whatever thing he would look at, and he would deduce it out to its most logical conclusion. Right. And so the reasoning part of that makes complete sense in my reasoning brain, right? If you can't fully, decipher something or delineate something or work on something and come to a definitive conclusion, especially if you can quantify it, that doesn't give you a clear answer as to a question or a situation or something, it's easy to kind of either give it, I don't know, at the very least, or at least I know enough to know that over there is not true. And so so there's just one God, and it just happens to be yours. And so is Jesus above everybody else, or Muhammad above everybody else, or it's, the Buddha, or pick your favorite deity. And then from there, then it becomes these series of righteous battles between different groups that decide that they're going to be right. And I think there's many people that are kind of looking around at everybody kind of going, you're all kind of crazy for thinking that you have the ultimate right answer. Right. I think who is it? I think it was in that Richard Dawkins big thing is it that out of all the gods that have ever existed, they're all wrong except yours. I think that was kind of his.
Yeah.
Kind of one of those.
I think it was that everyone's an atheist about every god except the one God that they believe in. Something like that.
Right. So you can see. So to me, that makes total sense how a person can logically say, well, if that's true, what are the odds? Let's just play the odds game or just the reasoning game. And so why is your God the one? And then that typically leads to it's going to be, now I have to sell you. And I've done sales and I understand what it means to try to convince somebody of an argument, that it becomes a bit of now I have to somehow prove it. And I think that is where a lot of what I would consider this spiritual journey, the relationship that you have with yourself and the divine starts to has a potential to take a really difficult path, because then it becomes, now I have to justify my own existence, my own belief. And then I have to do such a good job of that somehow I have to say something to you, Andrew, to convince you that what I think is right. Right. So then it becomes then you're just out there trying to convert people. And then it takes away from what, and I kind of mentioned in the beginning, but conformity is not uniformity. To me, at least, it's not. I mean, and I was in the military, and I've worked for and I get the reason why you want uniformity and conformity in terms of a certain application, right? That makes sense. In the military, you don't need a bunch of individuals expressing themselves however they want, right? That's just not conducive to that environment. And even to some extent, you could argue in a business, especially if it's highly specialized, you kind of want some creativity, but maybe it depends. There's a lot more lax there. But in terms of your own journey, as far as how you understand what's going on here in the divine and everything else, and just humanity on its own, I mean, that's when I think all those other rules, all those other bets are off. I mean, go anywhere besides where you live. I mean, I've been very blessed in my life to have traveled. between the military and the oil and gas industry, I've been 32 countries. I have relationships with people that are from a lot of those countries. I've been able to sit and talk kind of like this is like we're doing, which is why I love this kind of stuff, from all over, right? And you learn, right? And the thing that you hear from those people, and I think if you've traveled even a little bit, even if you've gone one other place, if you've gone to the Grand Canyon, or you've gone to New York, or you go to Newfoundland, or you can go to someplace in your own country. Like I can go anywhere, especially in the United States where you're at. I mean, you can go to Quebec or something, go to that anywhere in the province or Toronto. You can go, you're going to come across, you're going to come across people that just think differently, or even in your own backyard, even in your own church. I mean, I go to church on Sundays. The idea that everybody that's sitting in a pew with me has the same political belief, the same religious belief, that believe just what that exactly that we're just trying to nail, and we're just trying to get it right. As long as we get it right, we're all right. We got it right. And now we can go outside and make sure everybody, we got to tell everybody what we think is right. That just that's not the thing, right? That to me, that's not the thing. It's more about, is it challenging you? What is it doing? It should be in here. The journey should be in here as far as your relationship with the divine and whatever you're thinking about spiritually. And then, to be quite honest, and where I start to separate, especially with what are you doing? Or what are you doing about that? Are you living that out? Like, do you believe that? When you read the Sermon on the Mount, and blessed are the meek, and blessed are the poor, and all the, and when the world, when this, you don't have to buy into it. You can walk away. There's no requirement to put your hand down and say, this is what I believe. But when you do that, and you start to look and you start to read the stories, you start to look at the perspectives, and you really start to go and start to dig down and try to really understand what in the world is going on here. And if you do that, and it doesn't do something to you to get you to either challenge what you believe to start with, or enhance it, or improve it, or just grow. And I don't mean grow. And this is where we start to get into like the Aristotelian type Greek kind of, or even like the Western way of breaking things down to what they are and then using it to kind of build things up and progress. And I just think when you start to do that in any spiritual capacity, man, I think you're losing sight of what's the potential there. You start entering dualism and what is right and what's wrong. I was listening a little bit of your I think it was episode 6, the Richard Rorty reflection, and I thought it was such a brilliant thing in the beginning because you guys were really just breaking down, it's like what everything and how that even having a conversation, like a sentence, like the fact that President Trump was the 45th president, that's a fact. And it's a sentence, but the words but to describe what that is. I mean, how do you describe his presidency? Like that becomes almost impossible, right? How do you go back to labels? How do I describe Andrew? How do I describe you? How can I can start, I can get an indication. We can talk about it. We can tell where you were born, where you're from, all these other things. You get these slight indications of who you are by just some words and some titles and some experiences. Even the experiences you've had, how do you truly turn around and even your own life? Like if you had to write your own biography, how well of a job could you do from an accuracy standpoint, from a lineage standpoint, to truly capture with a couple of words what life has been like for you, right? What you've experienced. And so then to try to believe that you can take that and accurately decipher your experiences, just yours, onto a piece of paper, and that I would somehow read it, or you could talk to me about it, and I would fully comprehend what you meant, and then be able to take and tell that story to somebody else, let alone understand it firsthand. So now you take that synopsis and you add it to like anything, right? It becomes this, none of us know what the heck is going on. And it's the chaos, the beautiful chaos of life that just sits out there and proliferates in everything and everywhere that we are. And so I think if you take all those things down, and now that I'm going to grab a Bible and say, well, but Andrew, it says right here in John 3:16 that, you have to, if you don't follow, if you're God, he did this for you. And if you don't, it says right here, you're going to perish. Right. But then you start going back and reading the Hebrew, you start going back and getting a cultural context of Judaism, which was the origins of Christianity. And you come to find out that what that was, the context of what he was saying, that relative, that you're not going to be able, that the real kind, I was learning about this today, that if you want to break it down and allow for this? Kind of going back to the mixed mental arts, like, can we break down how we feel about something? Can we take down all our biases and what we've learned and what we think it is? It's like, no. John 3:16, like the verse everybody likes to hammer down on everybody. This is the ultimate one, Andrew. Like, if you don't buy into it, brother, you're going to Hades. It says right here, you don't want to go to hell, right? What kind of, to be honest with you, what kind of shitty value proposition is that? Why is that a value proposition that, hey, you're such a, God messed up in the beginning? Let's be honest. God creates everything, looks at it, says it's good. And then Adam and Eve, first chance they get, they screw up, make it all terrible. And the only thing that God can do is lay down the life, because we're so terrible. We're such pieces of crap. He's got to sacrifice his son to die on the cross for your sins. And that's the only way you're getting into heaven. And oh, by the way, that's the only thing that's there to allow for that offset. Go back to your friend in orthodoxy. If you go to ask him about that, you ask him about the origins of original sin, and that's not an orthodoxical belief. As a matter of fact, of the Abrahamic religions, only Western Christianity has that belief. Everyone else, which in the majority, number-wise, the majority of Christians don't believe that. Nobody in Judaism reads it that way, and nobody in Islam reads it that way. And so you're talking about a basic but that's a really neat value proposition. When I look at you and say, well, have you messed up in your life? You're like, well, do you want atonement for that? You want to make that's self-serving. To be honest with you, that's self-serving. It's my get out of jail free card. Man, I screwed up, but now I'm good. Hey, look at me, right? And not only that, but I'm good. Like, and then there's what do we do? Well, and that means I'm a little bit better than you. And or maybe there's a real sympathetic thing where you're like, oh my gosh, I want Andrew to be saved and be in heaven. I don't want him to be, there's always, I hear these from stories over the years. I don't want to be in heaven and look over and see my friend going to hell. And no, I could have said something to him and I didn't. That is some perverse, twisted use of shame and fear. That's shame and fear, right? Shame and fear control. Shame and fear become these mechanisms that allow you to be able to motivate people in ways that aren't relative to what they need to be doing. Love is the only thing that can transform, right? So you go back in the original Genesis stories and like just the creation story, you go back and really read the Hebrew again, you come to find out that God, it's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful story about creation and goodness. And, maybe it's kind of like kids. It's like, yeah, you weren't supposed to do it, but you did. I knew you were going to do it, but it's okay. Now you're going off in this beautiful thing called life, and I'm going to provide for you. And here, but it's a challenge, an internal challenge to get on down the road and experience life, this beautiful gift we've been given. And as hard as it seems sometimes to read, comment strings on Fox News or on social media, even though I've gotten off all of it, and people tend to digress. But I think when you really get people together and you really give them, and they don't hide behind computer screens and they're not hiding behind usernames, and you get them in a real room together, I think the humanity is a beautiful thing. I think everybody's like, oh, nobody's perfect. I wish to God we would stop saying that. Like, check. Yeah, we're not, but what are you trying to do? Like, I wake up every day and I want to do everything properly. I want to love properly. And I'm not going to say right or wrong. I want to invoke and to bring about the benefit of relationship, truly. And that's kind of where to become a relationship with God, but truly like relational, like this is time well spent, right? Listening. That's why I listen to podcasts all the time. It's why I try to hear people's opinion. It's why I try to, because it's enriching, right? And what does that do to you? And then what are you going to do about that? Like I listen to these things. I read the Bible and talk about forgiveness, and we go stories about that have challenged me. Like, I don't want to. Like, I don't want to forgive. Like, I'm pissed. This was wrong. But man, there's some amazing stuff out there that's available for us from a human experience if we would let these things that we tend to think are not valuable, unless it's like really critical times like right now or acute situations, we tend to think this is when love matters. And I'm like, man, love matters all the time. Love is the thing that I believe, and it's the acts of those love. And which is the basis of our podcast. Cause I think it's those are those things that when you really see it happening, man, it changes people. It transforms you. When you see somebody playing with their kid and you're in a park in Beijing and you see that, people, parents love their children and grandparents love their children. People just want these things for them. They just want these same things out there. It can't help but transform you. And I think that's the challenge is, are you going to listen to what's going on? Are you going to hear these people that are going to be speaking and really take it to heart? And is it, instead of only listening to something that's reinforcing your narrative, when's the last time you had your narrative challenged? Like, when was the last time you did a 180? That's why I love hearing you When I hear you say, not because I think, not because I don't, it's not about a right or wrong or think, I don't give a crap about that. When you say, look, I had this feeling about where I was militant atheist, like, and I get why you'd like, dude, this is, all this other stuff is hogwash. If I can't prove it, it's not science. It's dumb. I mean, like on Mixed Martial Arts, I've listened to Lawrence Krauss. I've heard all this stuff. I understand what he's saying. But for you to sit there and say, well, then I looked inward, like you said, I looked inward and said, maybe militant is a little too far. You're not becoming a priest. I'm not saying that, or becoming a Buddhist monk, but you had enough of you saw enough of a potential, like, hey, I could alter my thought process here a little bit. And I would argue, in some level, that transformation gained you something without, you're not trying to put like a success fail or some sort of measurement on it, but it allowed you a different perspective and a little bit. And I think it's an intimacy thing at that point. You're becoming more intimate with yourself, you're more intimate with what you think. Now you're capable of a little bit more, I think, sympathy and empathy and things like that. So now that when you see somebody who's militantly atheist, you're just like, I understand why you're going that way. But that road allows you a little bit of, some empathy. I'm not going to sit there and condone you for that, even though I don't believe that anymore. But now I know why you think that way. And it's not that, and again, it's not that you're trying to get them away from that. You're just able to rest, right, in the peace of knowing that that person thinks differently than you. And in that tension, it's fine. It's not tension like Democrat, Republican, like, oh my God, like what Protestant, Catholic, oh my, we got to start throwing hands or I got to get, I got to win or whatever else. And I know that's a really, really long statement to all that, but I just think it really, that for me becomes that, and all of those tangents and all of those things, like you said earlier, all of those things kind of come together and it just kind of puts us where we're at the moment. And if we're able, I just think if we were able to truly listen, I know that sounds ironic for somebody who's been talking for as long as I have, but if we're truly able to listen, there is a wealth of information out there, and not just information, experiences and people and perspectives that can enrich our lives. And can you do that? So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I like everything you said there. Very well said. Yeah. I mean, well, to go back to, like, you were talking about exploring religion, but it not speaking to you. That's the way I understand my perspective on religion in general, but I guess kind of like, I guess specifically the Bible, like you were talking about that. Like I reread that recently, it might have been last year or the year before, and I thought that some of the books in it were really interesting, and some of it is like beautiful poetry, and some of it has really good messages, and some of it is like some of the books are actually kind of historically interesting too. Like I'm not going to remember all of the names of these books that I'm mentioning that are like that, but also just like the whole spiritual and religious aspect of it. I just, when I read it, I think I almost try to empathize to the point where I try to like make myself see, okay, can I get like captured by this and have it in my heart and have it like that? And I just get to the point where I'm like, nah, it doesn't speak to me that way. I'm not as connected to it as other people are. And it's kind of as simple as that, really. And it's similar to like when I learned, I mentioned this on your podcast, what little I've learned about things like Buddhism and Taoism. Those are really interesting to me too. And I think they have some worthwhile aspects like Christianity does too, but I'd be hesitant to put that label on myself because I don't like accepting the worldview wholesale. And I think that, like, with the way that my perspective has changed on atheism, like you were describing it really well. Like I had this mindset, like an evangelical Christian, exactly like it, that I had to go around converting people to atheism because why would you believe this religion shit? It's so irrational and it's just wrong and doesn't make sense. But it was like, again, to go back to mixed mental arts, the like Jonathan Haidt's perspective on how the way humans think is that we start with our intuitions and then we rationalize forward from there. So people don't actually behave rationally anyway. And it's not like trying to prove religious claims scientifically it's really like missing the point, because religion is not a science, and it's not like it's not really meant to be a science. Like that's not what it's for. It brings people, like I look at it more like literature now, except like that it's more meaningful to people. Like in the same way I can read a great nonfiction book and just be overwhelmed by it and think about it for days afterwards. It's like I think that can be like a prolonged effect similar to that for religious people, and I just get it from like a variety of different places. And now my mindset has changed to the point that I'm just annoyed at anyone who is too sure of themselves. Like militant atheists think they're right and everyone else is wrong, and then militant religious people of any kind think they're right and everyone else is wrong. And I'm just always like, I almost just play devil's advocate sometimes. Like, you're a religious person, like I guess with Shane sometimes on here we've debated about theological concepts like God and stuff like that, just because it's intellectually stimulating, and I like doing that. And then whenever, like, if he's sure that that believing in God is the best way, I just don't like that narrative. In the same way that now that I think that anyone who says that the world would be better off without religion, I just think that doesn't make sense. Because, like, to go back to Jonathan Haidt and David Sloan Wilson and group selection, it seems like religion was a useful adaptation for people. And yeah, I just like that. Like, I like how you were talking about religion and just worldviews in general. And I still sense that mindset in myself sometimes, that I always try to overcome, just this sort of a militant mindset, I guess, but just like applying it to arguing with people about stuff. And I always try to remember to, like, that it's more important to just like listen to people and try to understand their perspective and let it kind of complement my own perspective and enhance my worldview, like you were saying. Yeah, that's all. It's all very interesting and very important, I think.
Well, I'm with you on the struggle of how do you deal with a counter narrative? How do you deal with something that is different than what you think, and especially if you start to see it as being harmful. I mean, I remember Lawrence Krauss, one of the things he was attributed as saying, and I think he even mentioned it way back, was he felt that anybody that took their children to Sunday school, if he had his way, could be considered child abuse. And I know that his reasoning behind that was that the typical kind of, I guess not progressive is not the right word, but just your evangelical, creation-based, don't believe in evolution. And if you start to stigmatize that at a young level for a child, and you limit their ability to then somehow make a contribution scientifically, or at least support that. And I understood his argument as to why he would ultimately think that, even though I can remember listening to that episode the Sunday before and the Sunday after I had my kids in Sunday school, right, at our church. So it was very much so. I understood that in his world, he thought I was committing child abuse, but it was also completely fine with me, because I think that I could see where he was going with that. But I think it also depends. But that becomes very simplistic. And it becomes very self-serving to think that, okay, that the only answer to your point is this over here, this militant aspect. And so, whether it's him trying to convince me or anybody in the Bible Belt that never send their kids to a Sunday school, or those same people in the Bible Belt arguing that prayer should be in school all the time and we should have it, right? So, to your point, now you're getting these people arguing, and then you're trying to find a way to win. And what it made me think about in relation to that struggle, because you're always struggling, because it's like you said, sometimes you can go for somebody who's a fundamentalist over here, and then they just shift sides, but they're still fundamental, right? They're still arguing that their way is the way.
Yeah.
And what is leaving out is there's a word that I've come across recently. It's a Hebrew word. It's one that I've heard a long time, shalom, and that typically that's translated in the Bible and in other places as peace. And I can, at least for me, I've spent the vast majority up until recently, peace in my mind, right? Visualize world peace. What does that look like? Well, to me, world peace was everybody's getting along. There's no issues, right? It's this kumbaya. Everybody's having sunset dinners, and there's no issues. Like there's no stress, there's no struggle, there's no nothing, that is peace. And it became apparent after this amount of time in my life, it's become very apparent to me that at least in this world, whatever that's worth, I don't see that happening, right? I don't think that's possible. I don't think that it's even reasonable to expect it, right? So then what in the world is shalom? If you go back and look at the origins of the word, it talks about, it kind of means tension. It starts to go in regards to tension. And if you really look at it as a vantage point, I'm make sure hopefully I'm getting this right. But as I remember it, it's like, if you're able to live in the tension of that diversity, if you're able to, in the oneness of a group of people, whether it's two or, you and somebody else or more, that to be able to sit there with that militant atheist and with that militant fundamentalist Christian, with the, liberal, whatever, socialist, whatever. In here you have a national socialist. Pick your group of people at the table, and if the shalom, where peace really happens is if you can sit there amongst all this and still have unify and still be able to work within that context and to live within that context and to live with this and not say that the only way that I can work is if all of these people convert to my viewpoint, because again, then that becomes this constant, and we're just trying to figure out who's the winner, who's got the right answer, instead of letting it just be. And that's kind of where if I would say where I'm trying to work towards is it's kind of what I feel like you do. I do find myself kind of like all of a sudden getting stirred up, like, no, let me help you come understand this right here. Let me understand, look, listen, you need to change. And it's not, that's just kind of what we try to do. And I think that the real fruit, if you will, the real opportunity is and it's not that you're giving away. And here's the other thing about tension, right? Going back to mechanics, go back to science. How does a suspension bridge work? How does anything like that work? There's a certain amount of tension relative to the situation that you have to provide in order to get stability, right? That's how that works. And it's all relative to the situation, right? And it's not just, 400 foot-pounds of force. It's just going to make it work. Like that 400 foot-pounds of what against what? Like that's having this arbitrary, just pulling on something isn't going to help. You have to understand the situation for what it is, right? How far, how big, how long, what's the material, what's all these, right? And it's complex and it's unique. So we looked at people that way, and that's what I continue to try to do, is that whatever that tension may be, and I would give, and I'm sure I'd get a lot of slack from this from one half, but not from the other. I go something like President Trump. President Trump, for me, does not resonate. Somebody that especially in this is going to sound bad. He's just not somebody that I would. That I find a lot of I find a lot of actions and thoughts in the way that he does things. I don't find that I would act that way. So there's a counter there, and especially based on the situation, his job, the moments, he doesn't motivate me to feel like him and I are kind of on the same page. I'm not resonating with what he does and why he does it, and I just want to say that, and that's it. It's not that he's doing something wrong or he did this. That again, that gets down a rabbit hole that's never going to get anywhere. But can I live in that tension, knowing that there's about a 0% chance that Donald Trump is ever going to change his ways because of what Sean McCoy thinks?
Yeah.
He doesn't give a shit what I think.
Yeah.
Not interested in, and even if he would, I have friends of mine that friends, they're like, they know what I think. They know my own wife. There's things that we think about that are different. My goal isn't to make my wife think the way that I think. That's a zero-sum game. That's not I don't think that has anything to do with it. But can I live with the tension of those differences and whatever that means? Now, how you do that and what how far, this is the challenge we have. It's like science, right? You got to do the work. You got to do and it's a consistent work, and it's not a one shot and you're done, right? It's a constant flow. It's a transformative thing. And now today this is change. Now this over here. How does this, right now, people right now, I can't imagine, as we're in the middle of this, this pandemic, that is in every aspect of every part of the world, right? Making itself known, having all kinds of, we're all being impacted. I do think it's always been this way, like the world, like it matters, you may not have been anywhere in this world, but you're having an impact on it. Like we've been in a world community since day one. And we're just seeing it without any, the veil's being pulled back about as far as it can go. And so we have this world community that is, and so what that's revealing about people, what that's revealing in terms of differences, and the real opportunity for us, what it really means, what I hope it means is we start to understand that what is really important to you in terms of the day-to-day as far as how you live. Is it that America's number one and we're first in everything and we have to be the best and only and the most and all the rest? Like this is this the thing? Or are we seeing that it's suffering everywhere and in every capacity, and just about what is this really telling us about the humanity and about the community that is this world, and how we're living, and what and how this is in tune. And last thing, that kind of thing, and I'd be kind of curious if you've seen this too, but I wondered I think about all kinds of things going forward, but one of the things I really think about is there's been so many stories now, like in I think it's Tibet or in India, they can see the Himalayas for the first time. There's all these pictures of how there's animals and stuff that are going places, and there's activity in places because there's no human interference. There's no human, we're not driving cars. We're seeing that, yes, human beings have a significant, back to the virus thing, right? Back to this, they look over and they see this group of, you see this beautiful planet, and there's this little group of, organisms running around, and they're everywhere they go, they're making a mess, right? They're building cities, and it's all like, it looks like how diseases are, they just, like anthills everywhere, and they're just like they're sucking up all this stuff. You could really get to the point where you could see where people would look that way, and it could really become, start to paint us in a negative light. But I think you take all of those things together, and really, what is this going to mean for us going forward, and how is this going to impact the way that we look at ourselves? But if you have that environmental, if we see we're having an impact, and see we're having an impact on the world, and so if we could just not do that, all the environmentalists and all the nature, I think you and I are both fans. You get to see the stuff that's beautiful. It could explode, and it's like, and I think the other hat, not to be dualistic, but the other kind of argument is going to be, that's great, we can have that. It just means that the entire economy of the entire world has to be shut down to make it happen, right? So it's giving both a little bit more perspective on the other one, saying we are having an impact. Everything we do is having an impact on the world, right? It does matter. And that over here is like, well, but to live, for us to interact, for us to be a part of it, we're going to have an impact on the world. And so what is that going to mean? And can both sides see this as an opportunity to come together, or is it going to drive them further and further apart, or is it going to give them, I don't know. So these are those kind of questions I think are so interesting right now, that, I don't know, like, what do you think about some of this stuff going forward, especially where we are right now?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. That's interesting too. Like that you said there's all this nature, and people are going to these places that are secluded because there are no people around there. I like that too. It reminds me of I think I was listening to a podcast in which they were talking about how they wonder how much it seems like global emissions are increasing because so many people are staying home and not commuting to work so much. And I've heard people talk about how, like, it's interesting to think about and debate about the extent to which some of the changes that are happening now are going to stay there. Like, I've heard people, like including people who are professors or teachers, who talk about how they think that a lot of teaching is going to switch to a more online form and stay that way. And then there are, of course, people who want to keep like a permanent basic income, and some people have thought it might change when we go back to the way regular society operates, in that maybe like when someone's sick, we might be more cautious. Oh, that guy's got a cold, maybe we should stay away from him a little bit. Maybe there'll be less of a stigma of taking time off from work if you're sick. Like, people might say, oh, you're getting sick, maybe you should stay home. And people might think more like, oh, that guy Jim came to work and he was sick, and Sarah was sick 2 days later. Oh, that's not good. I hope the whole office might get sick. And yeah, like, to go back to Trump too, that's interesting as well, because like, just in terms of Trump in general too, like, I also am not a fan of Trump, but then I also don't think that he's Hitler, and think that comparing him to Hitler is kind of ridiculous. And I even understand why some people voted for him. Like, this has been I've heard this described many times, like the mindset of some Trump voters, or the understandable way in that they voted for him, would be that, you know, they felt fucked over by, like, neoliberal policies, fucking over the working class, shipping their jobs overseas. Trump, in his campaigns, he was talking about how he's going to bring jobs back, how he's going to end wars. He didn't fulfill any of these things, but he said he was going to do that. So to me, that's understandable. And I also understand hating Hillary Clinton. And in terms of, like, his response to coronavirus has been interesting too, because at least according to, like, news shows that I've in which they've talked about this, there's been the, like, something like $4 trillion corporate bailout, and then something like a one-time $1,200 payment to American citizens. But then also Trump is instituting some sort of Medicare for all thing, like, testing and treatment for coronavirus is going to be totally free. So I've seen some super progressives talk about how he is out-lefting the Democrats on this particular issue. So it's all very interesting. And it's so interesting. It's simultaneously hilarious, not surprising, but also depressing that people are politicizing coronavirus. That's just so insane to me.
Yeah. And like I said, I think that the secret is, can we, and I say we, as at least for a personal standpoint, back to what we were talking about, can I find a way to live in that tension of not agreeing or getting upset or getting frustrated with a lot of those things, and how do I find, you know, shalom with that? How do I find ability to deal? Because it's just, at least in my experience, you know, this idea that, I'm not gonna say it's not gonna go away. Things change. They change all the time. You know, certain elements are kind of the same, but it's a constant state of transformation. We're constantly in a state on all levels, I think. So I'm not a big fan of, like, everything, because I've heard this my whole life. Same people arguing that nothing changes, or the same people that are arguing that everything is different. So you're like, well, which one is it? Like, help me out a little bit, brother. But, you know, President Trump in particular, like, I just, whatever it's worth, 2016 was the first time I did not vote Republican, but I also didn't vote Democrat. I remember my wife has a really good friend, loves Hillary Clinton, huge Democrat, and I live in a county that voted blue. Like, our county went blue here, right outside of Houston, in Harris County, which is the big one in Houston, went blue. And I remember as soon as I said that, I said, there's no way that I could vote for president, or at the time, for Donald Trump. And she put up her hand like, oh my gosh, high five. Are you on the Hillary train? And I was like, oh, sweetie. I was like, no. I go, I have no idea. Like, I cannot believe. I just remember sitting there, like, literally, before, when it was Gore Bush and Kerry Bush. I mean, for what it was worth, I felt like the vote for George W. especially, was it a lesser of two evils? I think that may be a bit of a stretch for those two. I just felt, you know, I thought both Al Gore and John Kerry, there was just so much inconsistency with who they were over the years, right? So much politics, you know, so much history in politics, and so many different, you know, going back and listen, they just seem to be all over the map. And at least, whether it was right or wrong, you know, I just felt like George W. And I'm sure I could get people to get all excited about this. But for me, at least at those times back in 2012 and 2008, or no, it was 2000, right? It was 2000, because 8 and 12 was President Obama. But so 2004, I just felt like he was, you knew what you're going to get, you know, like, he was going to be him, and good or bad, he was going to come to it with his value principles, and he was going to come at it pretty consistent in terms of where his value propositions were. And so I felt, to me, at least, consistency around, and for lack of a better word, I don't want to say integrity, like they didn't have it, but to a level of integrity that made sense to me. And then 2016 comes rolling around, and it's just like, I'm like, well, I can't vote for him. There's no way I can go vote for this guy. And then, but then I looked over, and, you know, it was Hillary Clinton, and I felt, you know, I was like, it just felt so. My issue with that, probably my biggest issue with her, was anytime that I felt that she like earned, like deserved the job, should have the job. It was kind of like, this is all she ever wanted, and it was kind of her thing. And then she had literally done anything she could in her life, you know. And I'm not gonna, I'm not one of those conspiracy theorist people, or I think that they're like part of some cabal or anything like that. I just think that her and her husband did everything they needed to do politically from day one to get as far down the road as they needed to, and we're willing to do pretty much anything to get there, legal or otherwise. I mean, it's just, and that happens on both sides, on all sides. So nobody's this, white, clean, spotless, participant in this entire thing around politics. But there wasn't. I just felt like when you give a speech in front of a group of people, telling them how you, especially if it's from a democratic standpoint, you're talking to people that are typically, lower class, have, impoverished, just going through a lot of the stuff we talked about on my pod, and just that the dregs of life, and like fighting through social justice, and you're sitting there wearing a $20,000 jacket, trying to tell them how you are one of them. It just rang so inauthentic to me.
I made $6 million this year from all my campaign contributions, but I represent the lower class.
Right. And like, I remember when President Clinton, when her husband left the office, and she was trying to say like, oh, we're just like everybody else. We're both unemployed. We have no idea where we're going. I'm thinking, I was like,
about to go on Wall Street and make speeches for $100,000 a pop.
You're not looking for a job. You didn't just get laid off. You weren't some massive layoff and like, now you got to go find some recruiter who believes in you to help you find a job, and hopefully you get it. You weren't suffering. And so it's just so I felt there was so much inauthenticity around that. And then the whole thing around Bernie Sanders and the DNC primary is when, you found when there was actual evidentiary proof that the DNC conspired to ensure that, that Bernie Sanders had the minimal chance of winning the nomination, and you could prove it, right? It was proven. I'm like, well, then you're now jeopardizing the democratic process. And I do know that it's happened on both sides. I know that personally, some other stuff from people I know that, so then the entire integrity of the democratic process that it's supposed to be the very cornerstone of our country, you're questioning the whole thing. And it just became I think it's a tough time for us that way politically, because then we're going into 2020 and we have former Vice President Biden and President Trump going into the 2020 election. And I'm just like, oh, like what in the world? Like,
Trump's gonna win.
What is
Biden can't? I believe the people who say that Trump's going to win anyway, because, like in debates, Joe Biden is gonna. I think Joe Rogan said it's something like a kindergartner going to school with with a massive bully. It's something like that's exactly what's gonna happen. He's gonna just demolish him with his schoolyard bully tactics, and point out the things that he's contradicted himself on, his voting record, all of these sorts of things, and then Joe Biden will be like, but Trump bad. I have hairy legs. I like to smell children. I care about the working class, though.
And I have a perfect smile, and I have the coiffed hair, and and he's been a senator for like 40 years or something like that. It's gonna be very interesting to see from this. Especially, look back. I remember the debates, between former Secretary Clinton and President Trump were just. To your point, I was like, is this really happening? Like, is this a presidential debate? And this is some stuff that I heard in the Navy on the mess decks. Two guys going like this is like a ranking contest back in the junior days. and she's over here trying to stay, political and somewhat of a high road, and he's over there just like, I'd put you in jail. Like if I was president, I'd be putting you in So then I think about him. I think about Joe, former Vice President Biden, and I think, what in the world? What is he going to do? What is he going to do? And when he starts, especially now, if you listen to these press conferences with President Trump, I don't know if you caught the one the other day. It's the one that I had to go back and listen to it. When he was showing a model of the coronavirus, I think it was a fatality model or mortality model, and he was talking about the model and this. And he said something like, and I didn't. This isn't my model. And then he goes, I've had a model, but not this one. And it was like a Michael Scott kind of like, that's what she said moment of like, I've had a model. He said, I've been involved with a model, but not this one. Kind of like, and I was sitting there watching it like, did he just use a press conference about the pandemic to remind everybody that he's banged a supermodel before? Like, he just did that. He just threw that in there. Like, what are we supposed to say? Like, yeah, man, he's had them, man. He's got him some models, bro. They're awesome. High five, DT. You know, it's just like, what in the world? Like, of all the things to say and to bring up right there, why? You know, it's just, it was so mind-boggling to me that's because you know, look, we're dudes. You've been around dudes. You know, that's some stuff that guys say on a golf course. That's some stuff guys say in a locker room. Literally, you know, we hear that all the time. But that, you know, guys just being crude or whatever. But at least most of the guys that I know, if I go and have dinner with their mother and their sisters involved, I'm not going to talk that way, right? They're not going to talk that way, and it's not that you're being fake or inauthentic. That's the thing too. Back to the appeal. I think there's so many. I've heard this so many times that, you know, people are like, they're just tired because they're tired of the PC. They're tired of all the dancing around, right? And he's just going to say whatever he wants. And pretty much everybody that I've talked to, that I've come across in my limited capacity, obviously, I don't talk to 63 million people, but in my limited capacity of talking to people, a lot of them, yeah, they're not highly impressed with his decorum, but they also are glad that they don't have to worry about, they know exactly what he's, because he just says exactly what he thinks. And so I mean, I understand that. I don't think there's anything wrong with expecting a little bit more in certain people at certain times, like a president of the United States during a press conference and during a pandemic. I don't think that's too much to ask or to expect that you should talk about the business at hand versus using it as a chance to be locker room. Now, if you want to make a joke that's kind of neutral or non-invasive around people or something that's too crazy to lighten the mood, I think that's an art too. But again, but then he doesn't. It goes back to our what we said before. So should I now hate President Trump and like tell everybody that they ever voted for him that they're an idiot and, you know, that you're contributing to the degradation of society and that you're the reason why the world's falling apart? That's not it either, you know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, like one thing about Trump that I actually appreciate is that he shows that the emperor has no clothes. Like, to go back to what you said earlier about what Tim and I were talking about in terms of Richard Rorty and what it is to be a president. Like, I kind of disagree with people when their main argument against Trump is that he says bad things, though. Like, he said, I grab women by the pussy, and he said that Mexicans are rapists. And I think these are terrible things to say, for sure. But more importantly, what are his policies? And I think that you can make much more substantive claims about policy decisions that he's made, like selling weapons to Saudi Arabia that they used in mass genocides in Yemen, for example. Like, I've heard a lot of people talk about how he's complicit in what could be considered war crimes, which makes sense to me. To me, that's a much stronger criticism than that, oh, he said bad things. And I think it's interesting. I understand. At the same time, though, I think it's good that people can see what it's like when people aren't being fake to a certain extent. But then I think, like you said, people were so fed up with the way that politics is normally practiced that they wanted someone genuine so badly that they went for a genuine asshole. Like, you could get a genuine person that's better than Trump.
But I think that's part of the thing too, is that he's a product of our culture. He's a product of the world we helped sustain and create. So we can get mad at him all we want for being the way that he is, but there's an element of we're getting what we laid out there, right? We don't want. I'll go back to, because there's people that I listen to and talk to, and they're right. If you go back and look at the way that, just for whatever it's worth, go back and read the Sermon on the Mount. Look at the way that, and he even said this the other day. And there was a national prayer breakfast right before all this happened, and there was a pastor that got up and was praying about forgiveness and forgiving your enemies. And so I think it was right after the impeachment, or right before it, and he was making. And this is a major tenet inside. I would say inside the message of the Bible. Like, you need to look at this forgiveness thing and take a look at it. Now, forgiveness has to be a choice for it to have any power. You cannot force, but you cannot sit there and say that anybody's ever done you wrong, that you have to forgive them. or that you have to, or that you have to do anything. I think that's the biggest thing that we were given, that choice, right? That's what gives it value and merit, and that you have to have that. But there's definitely a lot of argument, a lot of systemic aspects of the entire message that are like, you may want to think about this, and here's why. And if you've ever experienced something, if you've ever, I had a guy on my podcast that, and his story was basically around forgiveness. His sister, brother-in-law, niece and nephew, 5 and 2, all 4 killed instantly. 2 of them were killed instantly, and the 2 children died the next day from a drunk driver.
Oh wow!
Up there in Canada, in Saskatoon, in Saskatchewan. I mean, just like right through the room, and she didn't have a scratch on her. She killed 4 people, and they, gone, and she was okay. He's become friends with 4 of her 5 children, and contacted her in prison. And his stories around the forgiveness and why he decided to forgive her and what that was like for him. And so these become examples of the power that's out there. Now, again, but all that to say that it's such an amazing thing to go through, and it's such an amazing thing to experience, that forgiveness is such an important thing, that in regards to that application. But if you don't, like I said before, I'm a double talking a little bit, but if you don't have a choice in that, and you're not allowed to experience it, you're not allowed to put it out there, it just isn't part of it. It just isn't. It doesn't have any value. And so I think it's really a matter of understanding those choices and understanding those values, and really giving yourself an opportunity to understand them and for your own sake, and extrapolate them out that way. So,
yeah, totally. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I don't know what do you think about this stuff in terms of what's happening with well, basically, to throw your own question to me back at you, what do you think about all this stuff that's happening with coronavirus and Trump's response to it and people's political reactions to it?
Well, I agree with you that I find it unfortunate that people use it as a chance to continue to either politicize or divide, or China's bad, so we got to go stick it to China, and it becomes this. It's like we have this, and I think we've always had it, but we have this another amazing opportunity. This one probably more. It's a wider and deeper opportunity than we've ever had as a planet to again see this to see that we're all coming through this from the same kind of place. Is it a chance to turn around and say, well, look how well South Korea responded, look how well that Taiwan responded, and obviously the United States really screwed up their response, and oh my gosh, Sweden hadn't even locked themselves down, and all these people are dying. I think it's a bit unfair, and it misses the point that what the opportunity really, and then what is the opportunity? And you started listing things earlier about all these things that could change, and how many people in the workforce, how many companies look forth and go, well, if I could, if you have a big corporation, it's got 50, 60,000 people, and you just realize that I could have 12 to 15,000 of them working from home most of the time, or at least remotely, what would that save on operating costs and brick and mortar and all the rest of this stuff? And it indirectly turn around and now reduce, physical contact and all the rest of this stuff. Oh, it could reduce all these different things, and could it reduce commute times? Could it reduce emissions? Could that become part of the solution? There's so many different ways this thing can go, and I think it will go. That there's no way for one single narrative or one single aspect to kind of override all of it. It's been now pervasive pretty much to every single aspect of every single part of our lives, right? Healthcare and government. And, you kind of alluded to it earlier, made me kind of laugh. All these stimuli, I've always, a lot of friends, staunch Republicans, socialism's bad. Can you imagine Democrats? I guarantee you, every one of them cashed their check. Every one of them, they got a stimulus check or a PPP check or an SBA loan. They weren't crying anti-socialism then. I know they weren't, because I know they did cash it. And I don't want to be the smart ass to tell them that or make a big deal about it. But it comes back to this idea of, like, instead of trying to say that socialism is bad or that capitalism is bad completely, right? I think that, again, it becomes that dualistic. There's room for both, right? There's an opportunity for both to have an advantage. And then it becomes part of the work that we do to figure out where in that dichotomy, and it's not even those two things alone. That's the other problem. There's so many other multiple entities in that in terms of government and politics and the way that all this stuff goes, that impact how you decipher certain things. And instead of it just being, everybody's favorite, person to pick on, Adolf Hitler, National Socialist, right? So you start going, okay, we can never have any nationalism. Nationalism is always bad, or socialism is always bad, or, oh my God, look at what Mao did and Joseph Stalin. So communism has to be bad. And then you look over here, and that's why, like right now, you look at, where they are kind of, this democracy and freedom and capitalism. And then you look over and there's companies that are making higher. I saw an article the other day about getting mad at China for being profiteering around, in 95 masks. And I'm thinking, well, isn't that the basis of capitalism? The very, very basics of capitalism, if you were to let it go completely and not put any restrictions on it, isn't that what it says to do? That supply and demand dictate value and all the rest of these, and you can charge a higher premium for something that's in greater demand. I mean, that is the essence of it, right? If you play that out all the way and never put a human emotion on it, you get things like we saw on 9/11, where there are people charging $100 for a case of water or something like this, where they're jacking up the prices. Now, if it's a price increase, or this is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but if it's a price increase or something like that, just because you can, or just because you're being truly opportunistic, that's still within the realms, I think, of a basic capitalistic approach. But then there's a human element that comes in and says, I think this becomes part of the eternal question from a physical standpoint, which we're seeing that how much is enough? What is enough? What is it that we need to do? And I think there's a lot of us that are having this, back to your original question around what we're going to be learning. I think there's a lot of people that are having a massive reality check right now of their own reality. Not that my reality was right and you should have been listening to me the whole time. Say, I told you it was important to spend time at home. Say, I told you if we didn't drive cars, the world wouldn't get polluted. It's not that. It's all of our own realities and what this is doing to us and how that's transforming us. And I think the real question is going to be, is this a reason for you to then decide to heck with the rest of the world and I'm just going to get mine and screw everybody else? And it's all about me? Or is this a time to go, no, and let's use this as a chance to come together. Let's use this as a chance I want to keep mountain biking. I want to keep, walking around the park with my kids. I want to do some chalk stuff. I want to remember to take this time and do this. So it's going to be the challenge, as it always is. It's up to the individuals to decide how to react in this situation, I think.
Yeah, totally. I like what you said there. It's like, for example, with people hoarding toilet paper, that just pissed me off, because like, if you're just going and hoarding stuff, you're just making it the case that everyone has less. And grocery stores haven't closed. You can go and get toilet paper still. Yeah, like maybe some places are running out of it, but I at least haven't had any trouble finding toilet paper anywhere. And I've seen, like, online, like even like family members and people I know, using this to turn them against people. Like, I've seen all this animosity towards people who even go out at all. Like, there are these polar opposite perspectives that like millions and millions of people are going to die, and you shouldn't even, like a person I know just recently posted an article about how you shouldn't even go outside for jogs and you're being irresponsible and you're going to lead to people to die if you do that. And I saw someone commented on it and say, no, wait, I saw someone commenting on a video that someone had shared about people in a particular congregation who are still going to church. Mm-hmm. And someone commented on it and said, I hope these people die. And I was like, what an awful thing to say. Are you fucking kidding me, man? And then there's the complete total opposite perspective that coronavirus is a hoax, or it was a biological weapon from China or something like that. And I think that I like what you said there, because you're talking about how we can use this to turn ourselves against each other, or we can use it to help bring us together. I always go back to Joe Rogan endlessly, but he's talked about that too, how he thinks that, these are big changes, and maybe like a natural disaster, or not like a natural disaster, but like a disaster like 9/11, for example, maybe we can use it to help bring us together and understand the value of human life and friendship, because we can see our friends more often and we can go out and interact with people more often once all of this is over. And I think that's much more useful, both in the short term and the long term, than panicking and just allowing it to put us further into our tribes and going against each other, because it seems like that's just making and will make things worse.
And I think too that one of the things that I hope to do relative to that is to remember, right, which is the hardest thing to do, I think, is to remember the things that we know, right? I think it's in it, what are the lessons we've learned, and can we continue to put those at the forefront of what we think about? And that is to, if there's ever a time that we've probably had this expectation that after this, the whole world should obviously change its format. Like, how can you go forward and be a terrible person knowing that this just happened? Or, oh my gosh, in 2020, why is there racism? You know, like stuff we hear about all the time. Like, oh, I can't believe that people would say that in this. How many times you see it on all over social media? Every time somebody, I cannot believe it. And it's somebody would commit murder. Some guy would kill his wife and kids, you know, during a pandemic. How is this possible? And I'm like, it's all possible, and and that's not going to stop being possible. And I think it's this delusion that we think because we've experienced something or because something terrible has happened. I mean, kids have been dying of cancer. Kids have been dying of all kinds of things from day one. And, I mean, there's been, you know, arguably the first sin, the first wasn't eating the apple. The first mistake in the Bible was envy. Cain and Abel ended up in murder. Like, this is what we do. Like, this is part of our human experience. So I think it's giving yourself another level of expectation about what's going to happen out there in terms of context, in terms of actions, in terms of what people are going to be going through as well. And I think the real opportunity is that if somebody you come across is like so morbidly afraid to go outside to even sneeze, or that they see somebody and they're never going to get in front of, you know, within 6 feet of another person. Again, that's their goal. You know, instead of it becoming a ridiculing opportunity, instead of it becoming a chance to just, you know, demean and point and say, which I understand, back to our conversation, the tendency or the proclivity to do that. I get that. But where it really, you know, can you take a moment to understand, okay, where does that fear come from? You know, where can you, and that really takes time in relationship with a person. I think there's so much of this that happens. You're trying to be a friend after the fact, or a friend who doesn't quite have the intimacy with the other person to even have this kind of conversation at that level. And I think that's what a lot of social media and stuff like that offers the opportunity, is an invasive situation into somebody else's thoughts, and there's no appreciation for either person, because there's not. It just becomes a random, you know, BS fest. They're just going back and forth as far as that goes. So can we take this chance to really say, well, what was it about your experience during the corona that caused you? And I'm saying this from somebody who got into a bit of a tiff with a real good friend of mine about a month ago around this thing, because he was very fatalistic, the sky's falling, everybody's going to die. And it just led to a conversation that probably wasn't the best I've ever had, or the best that he hasn't had. And it caused a real friction in our relationship. And so I'm not speaking at this from a situation of somebody who's on a guru who doesn't suffer from that. It's a constant struggle to try to find that balance in terms of how to react to that. But I do think if we're able to take some time to try to understand why those people have that fear, why are they going through that? What makes them, why did they hoard 75 packages of toilet paper? And maybe to give them the opportunity to just maybe go, you know what, I just scared shitless, bro. I didn't know what else to do. I had a vision in my head that I couldn't, you know, I was gonna be running around, couldn't even wipe my butt. Like, oh my God, I couldn't even imagine that. Like, and I couldn't leave the house, and what do I do? You know, and because I've never experienced that before. And so I think giving a little levity and a little grace to people that are going through, and a little grace to yourself around this whole situation as well, in terms of trying to find that middle ground, in that context that allows us to then, and that's where I think the real opportunity with it, if we can hit the pause button in a sense, or at least slow down the engine a little bit to look around now where, you know, what's really going on here, and can this be a catalyst for us to go forward? And then can we honor the situation and say, we did learn some things, it did expose some things to us. Can we do something in the spirit of this a little bit better? But I think just expecting the experience itself to happen, and now it's going to be Shangri-La, is a bit of a, I think that's a high level of expectation. I don't think it's going to happen. And then I think what happens is people see that, and then because it doesn't happen that way, they just throw their hands up and give up. And I'm like, man, just take a moment. You're going to find those people that are searching, that are striving, that are trying to find more, and they need a little bit more time. I mean, this is a lot to process, right? I think the whole world is going to have post-traumatic stress from this whole thing, and they should, because that means there's an opportunity here for us to kind of get to a different place, you know, a different level of intimacy with ourselves, different level of intimacy of whatever it is that we believe in, whatever that means. Even if you don't believe there is anything to believe in, that's still a belief, right? And that's what makes us up as people. So now we have this chance to go deeper within ourselves, deeper within other people, And if we look at it as more of an opportunity to do that rather than this, oh my God, I can't go to the store anymore, or and allow for those fears. Like I talking to a friend of mine the other day, I was in the store, my wife needed some things, and she was trying to get some just something stupid like seasoning that doesn't have sugar in it. So I have to reach up and like grab a seasoning thing to turn it around to look at the label. Well, if this one has sugar, so I got to put it back. And all I can think about in my head is, am I committing some sort of like, new social faux pas that I touch something, and if you touch it, you don't take it. Oh my God. And God forbid you touch it in the fruit section. If I go pick up a potato and put it back, they're like, oh, got to throw it away. Like what? And I know there's probably, epidemiologists out there that are like, no, it doesn't transfer that way. And that's fine. But I mean, there's going to be a fear around that, right? So what does that look like going forward, and how do we handle that kind of stuff? But give ourselves a little bit of time to really kind of appreciate what's happening. But at the same time, I do think it's interesting that there's going to be a time limit. And I've learned this, and I think you'll see this too. And I'm curious how this is how I see something playing out. I saw an article about 9/11, that the 9/11 era was dead. That's the wrong word to use, that it had ended. That the 9/11 era was kind of over, because it happened 20 years ago now. And then this experience has kind of superseded that, kind of redefined everything. Well, in 20 years from now, people that are 4, 5, and 6 years old, they may have a cursory, maybe a small understanding of what's going on, but not a real one. They're going to be in their 20s, and there's going to be people younger than that have no idea what you're talking about. So we really only have like a 20-year window. It seems like a lot, but it's not really a whole lot of time. What are we going to do with this? And we're going to have a chance. You and I, we're going to say Corona, and we're going to know, right, for the rest of our lives, but at least from right now, pretty much everybody is going to have a perspective on this. But it's going to have it's going to sway and go on its way, right? Because look back, this is where the history people like myself and Jude, I know you do. I'm like, bro, we're freaking out about 40,000 people dead. Look at 1918, 40,000 people. Like that's a week in 1918.
Yeah.
It's like, and so it becomes, not that you're trying to demean it, but you're trying to draw inspiration. I feel like you're trying to draw perspective. Like these people went through pandemics and issues in the Great Depression. There's all this suffering that's happened before. They made it through. So can we glean a little bit of that from that side? That's all I mean by that. I'm not trying to discount the suffering now. I'm just saying that this is not new. And if we, again, if we use fear and shame, it's just those are controlling mechanism. Whereas I believe, love in the middle, that's really what's going to get you through, get you understand it, and really help, and be the only thing I think that can help alleviate to some extent some of that fear and shame. Because then you start doing dumb things. I just got to read a book, Daniel Gardner, called The Science of Fear, or Science of Fear. And I read this right before the pandemic hit. And it's so interesting how it goes back to a lot of the MMA stuff that we learned about how your brain and your gut, more or less, or how you feel can override, even though you know better what's going on, right? That happens, right? We know that happens, and we know that we can manipulate that. We know it can be manipulated. We know that it's there. And so it's really trying to understand that, and kind of giving that perspective of saying, okay, you feel like the best thing you could do is hoard everything. I remember my dad, especially down here in Texas, he was like, he sent me a text. He goes, do you have a gun? Like, do you have a handgun? And I was like, I have one, like way back in the back of my class. I don't, even though I love to shoot and hunt and stuff like that, I'm just not a gun guy. Even though I used to be like, I used to get all excited, but it just has no appeal to me anymore. He's like, well, do you have one? Like, yeah. I goes, okay. Just want to make sure you have a handgun, because I have plenty if you want one. I'm like, and it's asked him, I said, well, what do you, he's like, well, I just, you just never know, you may need it. And I'm thinking, no, I'm not going to need to like throw up sandbags in front of my house and like repel the enemy and like all these invaders. It's not a Steven Seagal movie or something. I love my dad, but he's been preparing for a home invasion like for the last 40 years. It has never happened. I mean, we'd have knives and guns stored all over the house, and I'm like, what in the world? It's like, but to understand, like, he's just, he's just a little scared. He's just, and start listening to all the hype and all the worry and all that sorts of stuff, and it's like, oh my God, I got to get up there and make all this stuff happen. And so but it's again, and there's a part of me that kind of wants to jump up and be like, Dad, you're so dumb. Here's the percentages on home invasions, and you have a great, and I can find myself doing this. If anything, that gun's going to probably be used to kill my stepmom before it's going to be used to kill an invader, according to statistics and blah blah blah. None of most of that's going to be just either create dissension or just make people pissed off, or just go right over people's head. So the real challenge is, how do you then deal with that tension as far as those differences of opinion?
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, That's interesting what you said there. I should try to especially when I'm talking to people who are like they get carried away from about coronavirus, to understand more that's coming out of fear. And that's one thing that I have done successfully a little bit with my close family member, who I was like debating about with the numbers of coronavirus and comparing them to the flu and stuff like that. Like eventually at one point I said, why are you obsessing about this so much? Like I know every day, because it's almost like impossible to avoid, I end up reading at least one article about coronavirus and probably watching several videos about it, even though I'm just exhausted from hearing about it and just tired of hearing about it. But it really sounds like you're stressing out about this and you're just thinking about it all day long. Maybe it would be a good idea to try to just take a break from hearing about it so much. And I just don't want you to get so worried about it. There's nothing that you can do. You're doing all that you can do. You're self-isolating, you're being really cautious. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I'm doing that too. We're all doing that. Apparently, I heard recently that I'm not sure whether it's in Canada in general or just here in Alberta, the curve is flattening a little bit. So that doesn't mean we should just all go out and do everything now, but who knows how long it'll be. But as long as we can, just live life in this, for me anyway, because I'm very privileged, is not that different. We can make it through this, and it's not going to be an apocalypse. And even if it ends up being worse than I and some other people expect it to be, there's not really anything else that you can do about it than what we're already doing. And just worrying about it all the time will just make things worse.
Yeah. No, exactly. And that's where, because you'd hear this, let's be smart. And then if I felt like as soon as they said, okay, now go, it was like, like they went all the way over there. Like the smart thing to do is to hoard and worry, and we've got to disinfect every single thing in the world, and we got to live in a sterile environment. It's like I thought he said smart, right? I thought he said but then again, that's a very, very, as going back to our friends in the MMA world, right? Smart is a term that I don't have much use for anymore, but you know what I'm saying? Like it's, and I don't think smart's the right word. Just kind of, what is the wise decision, right? Is it to go lick toilet seats on an airplane? That's probably not a wise decision, right? That's probably not wise. But going to the store to get something and making sure you're a little bit cleaner is fine for the moment too. And I there's a longevity issue there that I always go back to that. I wonder about, but it's all those things like you said. And then if it happens, you see somebody acting a way that you kind of don't agree with, or you even see as detrimental, especially to them. Like a buddy of mine that I'm thinking about, I just felt like, and even people like you're causing yourself this stress, this pit, and that's not a very good feeling, for lack of a better word. And you start reading like, what's the best way to boost your immune system? Well, it's avoid alcohol, it's lots of sleep, no stress. These are the best ways to boost your immune system, and some other stuff like that. And you're going, okay, none of that is in conjunction with especially, at least definitely in America. I don't know to some extent, but you guys are up there, eating good food, getting good night's sleep, not stress. And you're looking over going, you're not doing any of those things. You're sitting around drinking all day. You're worried about it. You're staring at the television, reading, you're listening to that. You're not even going outside. Like, you get it? Like you're not helping yourself. And it's not suggesting you go out and, dance and frolic again, or make it, you're not being naive. This becomes that balance. And so I think the challenge comes down to how do you, and not that you have the way, but just kind of like, hey, maybe we shouldn't obsess about this, even though, like you said, we can't even get away from it. We can't even, and then the language and the way that it's presented, that's where I start to get I've had a couple of really good conversations trying to show people like, hey, here's, like there was one, and it was finally an article by CNN way back in the beginning. And I was like, I just want to kind of understand the basics. Like what's the data? Give me some things to like pull from a knowledge standpoint. And it's, here's what the title of something like, here's the coronavirus, or here's what the coronavirus is. And so it had this, like the first quarter was kind of basic, epidemiology and where it comes from. And there's 6 other ones, and it's called a corona because of the crown. It's like, okay, so understanding. And then it was like, but viruses are like zombies, and zombies that don't even come, that they're dead and they don't even become alive until they get into your body, and then they multiply. And then they brought in the movie Aliens, they were like in the movie Aliens where it transferred to, and I'm like, you're just being a sensationalist jerk.
Coronavirus is not going to burst out of our stomach.
Yeah. And it's like, do you understand that, like, that's how all microbiome, like that's how all, the bacteria, fungi, that's how they all produce and spread. That's how they all do it. Even the good ones, the ones that were in the yogurt that we're supposed to eat to make us digest food really well. Like, I mean, like, and now you're just using this to flip it. And the only thing that the incentive to do that is to create this panel. Like, I have this thing that's multiplying inside of me, and it's spreading, and I can't see it, and it's causing me to, and now I'm going to die. Right. And then what are you going to do with that information? Now it's just and this going back to kind of our friend, President Trump, that I think he hooked on, and he got on, and the media never addressed the issue that when he can point to that, and that's what people mean by fake news. Not just that the information is fake, but that people have gotten more and more savvy because of podcasts, because YouTube, because they can dig deeper because of the internet. They can really figure out what the heck's going on. You can't just spout stuff in the back of a train all over America and nobody's going to fact check you, right? They're going to look and go, well, is that what you said? Is that true, right? And they start to go do that, and they're going to find out that, hey, you start to look at, okay, well, if you're not paying for the product is you, kind of thing, right? So all these, CNN's always been free, so is Fox News. The way that they make money, and they make a heck of a lot of money, is get me to stay there. Well, then how do they do that? Well, they're not doing it. So then you start looking at how that nuance works and how those things are motivated. It goes back to fear and stuff like that. Enough people are figuring it out, and then there's a lack of trust, and you don't accept people for being truthful anymore. You start back, especially in our country, start back in the 60s with the Vietnam War. After World War II, we thought we were this perfect nation. Korea was kind of a nosebleed. Nobody really wanted to talk about it. We didn't really want to talk about the fact that we had defeated this terrible world power, but we still had, laws in the books that people that were black and white couldn't get married and crazy stuff like that. And so we had to let's internal look-see, and then all of a sudden we went and tried to be the world's hero. And now that we got drug into 2 different wars, and we were the world's hero, and there's a lot of money to be made in the I'm not trying to say that's why they did that, but in terms of after World War II, there's profiteering, there's ego, and there's pride, and there's power, and there's all this stuff. And it started to spread, and we got we had a lot of these questions that came up over the period of years. And I'd say decade after decade of people kind of going, is this the right move? Should we be fighting on the side of South Korea? Should we be in Grenada? Should we be in the Middle East? Should we be over here? Should we be doing this stuff? And people are just people, and we're just a country full of people. So and as we mess up, people look around and go, what in the world is going on here? And so you just kind of find out that there's this, you realize that we're no better, right? That kind of thing. And so I think and years and years and years of that, and especially recently, of just misinformation and understanding how misinformation has worked. And he flipped it like a good salesman, used it to his advantage, and said, but they never addressed that issue. And I think it goes back to a lot of this stuff is just, let's put the cards on the table around, here's the shortcomings, here's the issues, here's where we've got things wrong. It makes me think of our conversation about Jim Crow and the rest of that stuff. It's like, instead of trying to make excuses or whatever, it's like, we need to put things we need to get it out there and actually have a conversation about it, and really have some understanding about it, because that's what's keeping all this stuff from happening. And you can see in these situations how easily it can get all twisted and screwed up. And now everything's China's out there doing crazy stuff in labs, trying to create viruses that could, be weaponized, even though everybody that knows anything about viruses will tell you this isn't the virus you'd make that way, but you can't convince people of that. And it's like, oh, they're eating bats and armadillos and stuff over there. And that's why it's crazy stuff like that's happening. And because of that, that's causing all these issues. And now it's us versus China. And I'm just like, man, I think we're losing an opportunity to not make it about us versus somebody.
Why would China send a virus to like so many other countries? I haven't heard anyone explain that. Why? Like, I haven't even heard why the people explain why China would use a virus to attack America, and then also attack their own citizens, and then also all of these other countries. I don't get that.
Yeah, I can't see a virus being used from a weapon. I mean, it'd be the worst weapon, to be honest. Like, it didn't care. It didn't know who's part of the Communist Party. It didn't know who's the right people to infect and not infect and that kind of thing. I think it fits a narrative that a bit of I don't know if romantic narrative is the right thing, but it definitely fits a narrative we've seen about this this crazy stuff going on and weird things happening and people being cloned and all this, these experiments and power and control. To me, it's a power and control issue, and it's just a jockeying for position and creating belief in one side or another as being the side of truth versus by painting the other side as either as big of an enemy or as big of a threat as possible to your security and what you're doing, then allows them to turn around and say, okay, well, whatever they're doing, and there has to be doing something nefarious. And that's why I thought, different country, but same situation, Russia during the 2016 election, where there's like, everybody's like, I can't believe that, Russia would try to influence the U.S. election. I'm like, just any number of books about former CIA operatives and economic hitman, that have turned around and used socioeconomic influence to have, to create political results in other countries and messing with people's democratic process throughout the, all over the world. It's kind of been our forte for the last 50, 60 years. And so it just kind of makes me go, well, what are you getting upset about the Russians for? I mean, we do this stuff all the time. Like we do this constantly. We do it for our benefit. And so it's like, well, what are you getting upset about? If I'm Russia, I mean, what better way to really create things? I mean, look at what they did. What they did was brilliant in an unfortunate way for us, and it was just stoking all this division. And it wasn't even really to create one side or to help Hillary, to help President Clinton. I don't think it was to help either one. It was just to kind of take advantage of all the soft underbelly parts of our culture, especially in the United States. And so, but people miss that. I'm like, you're upset about whether or not they were involved in it. I'm like, why was it working? That should be our question, is why all it took is a couple of guys sitting in, Moscow or Stalingrad or wherever they were sitting, hooked up to the internet, create some fake Facebook group, put a bunch of, BS memes and other stories together that don't have to have any truth to them. And yet it was enough to get you to convince you to think that this is what is happening. And it's just consistently reinforcing this narrative that you have playing in your head around our society and what's going on. And, all these wave of immigrants coming to take us over. And, where's all that gone? Where's all the immigrants that we did this other immigrant, his other tweet, saying that he's going to shut down immigration now because of the invisible enemy. And it's like, it's so convoluted, all that stuff. But that's why, all that to be said, again, you and I could spend a lot of time I think a lot of people do, just going nuts trying to consider all that, versus just kind of like, I'm at peace that I can't do. There's only so much I can do in that world. What can I do? I got 4 wonderful people that I live with. I have friends and people all over the place with. I can have people like you that I can just have a conversation with. And can we impact each other? That's the real opportunity, versus thinking I'm going to convince some senator or some vice presidential candidate to somehow let them become the torch for the world and out there to do something. So I really think it comes back to us and putting our faith in ourselves first, and not expecting a political party or a corporation or anybody even really other than yourself to really be to hold that light and hold that torch going forward as far as that goes.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I agree. I like it and agree with everything you just said there. Well, I'm glad that we talked about so much more than my like tentative plan about not just mixed mental arts and religion, but also Trump and coronavirus. Because like I said, even though I'm tired of hearing about it, it's good to have a conversation with someone who has a similar, and I would say also nuanced perspective. Yeah, I might put like something to do with Trump or coronavirus in the image in the thumbnail for this to like lure people into learning, hearing us discuss the deeper issues like ideology and mixed mental arts and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, because I think it's all. I love tangents. I love those. They all connect. They're all part of it, right? It's all part of that whole thing, and it's just. Again, I still think it's a beautiful opportunity for us to come together as people. I think it's a beautiful opportunity for us to use this as a time of transformation, a time for intimacy and inner reflection on an individual level and with others, right? I mean, I know I have reached out to people that I haven't talked to in months, and shame on me in a way, but it's kind of like, hey, that's what's important. Should I spend all day long reading about, Michigan's response to the coronavirus and whether or not the mayor or the governor should have done this, or the governor should have done that, or should the governor of South Dakota have kept open, done what they did? I could spend all day doing that, or I could call somebody that I know personally, that I have a relationship with, or I haven't talked to in a long time. Hey man, how are you doing? What's going on in your world? Kind of thing. And that to me seems like a much better use of our time. And that's the challenge, I think, again, that we have, is you can spend your time doing one of the, or with this or that or the other thing or whatnot. And again, it's not that it's a right or wrong thing. It's just more of a, where are you putting your effort, and what are you doing about the things that you believe in? That makes me think of your faith, or at least my faith. And that's, I can sit here and I can recite chapter and verse, whatever. It's like, I know enough to know that people that they're like, that's great. I don't know, whatever that means to you, but if you're not living that, right? If you're not being the fruits of the Spirit, it's my favorite Bible verse, Galatians 5:22-23. If you're not doing that out in the world, if you're not representing what you believe in, whatever it happens to be, to me, it's just more, are you representing? Because what's ironic to me is that you always are. Is it really is reflecting on what it is that you truly believe. That's really when the chips are down and things kind of fall. That is what's going to come out, is where your heart really is. And then the question is, and it's not, again, it's not a right or wrong thing. It's just what does your heart tell you, and what does your heart say, and where does it go? So where does it take you, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well said. Well, I know you wanted to start earlier than I suggested, because you wanted to get to spend some time with your wife, and I'm glad that we got to talk for so much longer than I expected. This is great. But I guess I should let you go. Unless there are any other topics you want to discuss.
No, my wonderful wife would tell you that I could sit here all night with you, bro. It's not a big deal, but I will. I will take you up on your offer to head out. But we'll have to do it again. Have you come on my, we'll continue it and keep going. But I just think in the end, if there's anything else that stands out, it's just that it does help. Sit down, talk to somebody, get their viewpoint first. Why do you, why are you doing it this way? Why are you up in arms about Black Lives Matter? Why are you taking a knee during the national anthem? What is it that's motivating you to do that? Versus just saying, no, they're 100% wrong. Why is it that you love Donald Trump? You think he's the greatest president that's ever been elected? They'd really give a chance to hear what they have to say. And I've had some situations like that recently that I could go to, but it's people I know from the evangelical side, people I know from the faith-based side, if you will, that have people that know people that are convinced that there's things happening kind of in that world that are even with President Trump, that there's changing of hearts or influences that are happening. And I don't know what's going on in his world. And that's why I think at the same time, I always try to at the end of the day say, whether it's him or Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or anybody, whoever's saying something, I don't know all what's going on in that world. And it's hard to do. It's hard to remember that. I don't know all the things that they know. I don't know all the things they're going through. I don't know what they've been exposed to. Is it just a knee jerk and think that they're either wrong or right, especially if it's compared to what I think? I think it loses the chance of at least an opportunity for exploration around what they're thinking, even what you're thinking and why. This is where I go, even if it's introspect. Why do I feel this way about this subject? Why am I so adamant that Texas is the greatest state in the United States? Is that really? I mean, is it really? What is it? Is it really? Of course, people from Texas are like, well, yeah, and so it's, but it's, and I know it's kind of a simple way of putting it, but even your own beliefs and your own things that you think about. When's the last time you really took some introspect? And so, what is this teaching me? What's the opportunity? Where can I grow with this? What is really going on here? What's important? And where are the nuances and stuff that I can learn from and connect from? So I think if we can all find a way to do that, and then allow other people to do that as well. Man, I just think that it's like I think of like soil, like you're enriching the soil and it's producing, produce things and produce fruit and produce things that could be. I think it's just nothing. I mean, lack of a better word, amazing to me, I think.
Very well said. Yeah, like what you were saying there about just trying to listen to people. That also reminds me of the mixed mental arts chats that we've done lately. Has been on the book called How to Have Impossible Conversations, which is basically all about using the Socratic method with people and just asking them questions about their beliefs and trying to learn about why they believe what they do rather than changing their mind. And I like what you said there too about the importance of introspection and trying to think about why you hold the beliefs that you hold. And it always like, to go back to Jonathan Haidt, it always seems to come back to this emotional feeling that you have to do with whatever your worldview is. And yeah, on the last How to Have Impossible Conversations episode, James Lindsay was on there. Actually, Peter Boghossian was on there for a few episodes too, but I unfortunately missed those ones because I had too much schoolwork to do. But after the last one, James Lindsay actually said that he would come on here and talk with Tim and I about postmodernism and how public intellectuals sort of like inaccurately connect postmodernism to social justice, and talk more about this critical social justice theory that James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, and Helen Pluckrose have been going into with those grievance studies hoax papers. So yeah, that's something for people to look forward to who are watching this. But yeah, I like how you kind of kept the theme, an underlying theme of our conversations. I guess we both did, obviously, of just trying to look at all of these things like religion and different types of ideologies and politics and what's going on with Trump and coronavirus everywhere, just like through that lens of examining people's ideologies and trying to understand where people are coming from and trying to understand our own perspectives more. I think that's a great takeaway from this conversation.
I like it. Love it.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Amen.
Well, thanks so much again for talking, man. And yeah, we should definitely do it again, and I'll definitely come back on your podcast anytime for sure too. And I was just thinking too, maybe we should do an episode with we should try to do an episode with you, Hayden, and I. I think that would be great. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I think him. I mean, I think a lot of the guys I've heard you with. I think what's Tim or something. I mean, anybody that likes to sit around and have a conversation is willing to just, at least give somebody else an opportunity to speak.
Yeah, for sure.
Just having that respect for, because it does. I mean, it should challenge you. Like, it just should. I always sit around and go, what do I believe and why? And this could all be BS, right? But
yeah.
Okay. Let's figure this out. Let's talk about it. Yeah, cool, man. Yeah. Really appreciate it, brother. Love the conversation, and really appreciate the opportunity. And I wish you nothing but the best with the show. I like listening to it. I like because it turns on that nerd brain for me for sure, and lets me hear that kind of that type of conversation that really kind of pushes and challenges and goes so. And we call it, and I don't see it as progress anymore. So much I see it more intimacy. I feel like we're kind of incomplete, and it helps to again shed more and more light to help that which causes us to go deeper and gives us a little bit more clarity versus, well, now I know something and now I can just turn around and use this. I heard this thing on this podcast. I'm just going to sit here and regurgitate it the whole time. So keep doing what you're doing, man. I love it.
Thanks, man. Well, I'll just say all the stuff I like to say at the end of these episodes, and then you can give any last words there too if you want to.
Sure.
So thanks as always to everyone for watching this. Those of you who press the like button, subscribe to my channel, share it everywhere. Anyone who comments, and especially to those of you who give me money on Patreon, which I really appreciate. And like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all, and groove is in the heart. All right. Anything else to say before we end it there, Sean?
I would jump on what you're saying, and just, to me, love wins. Love always.
Yes.
Love never fails is what I would say. So
yes. Yep. Yes, for sure. Love never fails. All right.
All right, man.
Adios until next time, everyone.
Brother, God bless.
Thanks.